Hello, my guest today is Ryan Kopyar. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Hey, Kevin, thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you here as well. I'm anxious to dig into some of what you're doing in the mental health space. But before we get started, why don't you back up and give us your background? How did you get into this line of work?
Sure. Well, let's take it back to a story that I share vulnerably. It took me about probably 30 years to be comfortable to share this story with people, but I realized that by being vulnerable and sharing it, it was helping other people. So hopefully this isn't too heavy, but I think it's important to share. When I was about 2.5 years old, shortly before my third birthday, my mother was raped and killed, and it was a pretty tragic experience for myself as a young child and my father. And I grew up in a very loving home, and a lot of love and support. But I think that there was a piece of me that never allowed myself to heal, that never allowed myself to really acknowledge what had happened to me. And it was kind of at the same time that I experienced a pretty serious physical injury through a car accident, that I was like, okay, now my physical body needs some healing. Clearly, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, I need some healing. And it was at that convergence point that I said, okay, I'm going to reach out to get some help from my own counselor. His name is Billy. Played a tremendous role in my life, and he really helped me to facilitate some of that deep healing, which I had been suppressing for a long time. And after that, I said, man, I got this thing somewhat figured out. I want to pay it forward to other people to help them.
Yeah, fantastic. Wow, what a story. So you had mentioned that you had gone through that very traumatic event as a very young child. So certainly that's going to leave an imprint on you. And in spite of being raised in this very loving environment after that, still there's some unresolved trauma there. And clearly we anybody I think can imagine that, right? And then you mentioned being in a car accident and having some physical trauma as well. And so now we've got kind of this whole person that's quote unquote broken, right? And you're seeking out some sort of healing. How old were you when you asked for help there?
32 years old.
Wow, 32. And how old were you when you were in the car accident?
I was 30.
Okay, so a couple years later. So quite a few years here. And then what was the impetus? What made you decide to seek help?
So I was involved in the car accident, and really tried to do some healing on my own, and realized, hey, there was a lot. I was diagnosed with PTSD after the car accident because it was pretty serious, and kind of realized like, hey, there's some triggers here for me mentally, emotionally, spiritually, that are coming up. And I didn't realize that the car accident kind of trauma, and how that was interplaying in with the trauma as a young child, right? That was a traumatic experience as a young child. And so when I realized that the two were interconnected, and that, I look at healing as mind, body, soul, right? So when I realized, hey, it's not just a physical healing, but there's some mental, emotional, and spiritual healing that needs to happen here, I was like, okay, I got to get this thing figured out. And I would say it was probably about a year after the car accident where I really dived in, took the dive into seeing a counselor myself.
And let's pick this apart a little bit because I think this is important. There seems to be, and it's changing for the better, but there seems to be a stigma around mental health, and maybe more so, especially for men in my generation, right? So that the over 50, 60-year-old males asking for help is a sign of weakness, and certainly asking for help from a mental health counselor could be perceived in our self-perceived, right, as some sort of weakness. And there's that stigma around there. What advice do you have for listeners that may have some unresolved traumas, but just have yet to find the courage or have yet to reach out and ask for help?
Well, that's such a great question, Kevin. That's really great. That's one of the main themes of my book that I wrote, Unlock the Power of Your Mind, was to be vulnerable with people. Oh, there is so much power in vulnerability. And I think that when men in Western society, we're supposed to be tough, right? We're supposed to be the
Yeah.
breadwinners and the earners and the providers for our family. the strength that it takes to be vulnerable and the strength and the courage that it takes to open up, dude, that is the biggest sign of strength. And even though many people out there may think that it means that we're weak to ask for help or we're weak to share our story, because people are going to think that, less of us or whatever the case may be, right? That's all nonsense. And true strength and true vulnerability means opening up and sharing a piece of yourself with others, because that's the beautiful meeting ground. So my message to men or women out there, right, that were kind of raised in a way of like, well, you got to suppress it and you got to keep things down. I tried it for 30 years. And let me tell you, I'm much happier now than when I was keeping all those things suppressed.
Okay, so thank you for sharing that, and I think you're right. I've not heard it quite flipped on its head that way, that it's more courageous to ask for the help, right? To be vulnerable than it is to not, right? Now, you had mentioned that, you had spent the first 32 years of your life living kind of with this suppressed trauma, and then, of course, on the other side of that, you asked for help, you received help, and got some healing, and it sounds like your life was transformed. How was your life What was your life like before that changed so radically after you received this help?
There was a void inside myself that I was looking to fill with external things, whether that be accomplishments in my work, whether that be with, drugs and alcohol and partying and going out and having fun. Whatever the case may be, I was always seeking something external to fill the internal void. And the answers that we need are inside ourselves. That love, although external love is important, the most important love is internal. And when we can connect with that internal love, it's just like this weight lifted off our shoulders where we're no longer looking for the external. Because when I look external, I'm always going to need more. I'm never going to be fulfilled. When it's internal, that's the beauty. And once we have it internally, then we can not only get it from the external, but share it externally.
Oh,
Does
I
that
love
answer
that
your
message.
question?
Oh, it most certainly does. Yeah, no, and I love that. I think a lot of us can relate to what you're saying there, right? We've got this hole in us, and we try filling it with things, external things. And to your point, that might be success in a career, it might be in a partner, it might be with our children, or it could be material things, more money, whatever that is. But that's never enough. You get that thing, and it brings you some temporary happiness, perhaps, but it's not a soul fulfilling thing the way you're describing it here, right? So you're saying we flip that script, we bring this, we learn to love ourselves, we practice self-love. And then when we're healed with this internal love, the next step, I suppose what you're saying is actually sharing that, right? Sharing, just having this passionate fire inside of you, this passionate love, and sharing that with others. And then we're really into this place where we're healed or healing on this journey of healing. Because I suppose, well, let me back up. Let me ask you, are you healed or are you on the journey of healing? Are you on the path?
I think we're always healing. I
Right
think there's
on. Okay.
always another level of healing. Yeah.
I thought you might go that way, but just want to double check. All right. So now you had mentioned your big thing, of course, is mind and spirit and emotional. Talk to us about these different components and healing these different components. When you work with folks and folks are coming in with you with trauma, what are you looking for and how are you separating those compartments?
Sure. So I think the first step is to really think about what we're thinking about. Oftentimes people aren't taking a moment to stop and take inventory of what am I thinking about? These programs that run in our head, right? I'm not enough. I'm not a good enough dad. I'm not a good enough mom. I don't have what it takes to do this. Or, I mean, you could plug and play probably a lot of different ones, but it's typically I'm not deserving of love. I am not enough. I'll never be good enough. I am undeserving. Some iteration of that, right? And so it's really taking time to figure out, hey, what am I thinking about, and then where did that come from? And I'd be willing to bet for most of the listeners and viewers out there, or certainly for myself, it came from something from childhood, whether that was a traumatic experience, either noticeably, like in my case, or not as noticeably, right? Where it's more subtle. Either way, that programming gets inside of us, and we've got to first identify it so we can figure out what it is and then start to release it.
Okay, so I think everybody can relate to what you're saying, that kind of that negative self-talk reel that plays and plays and plays through our heads very often. And we've discussed that a few times on this show as well, ways of dealing with that. Now, you have this kind of this tripod of ideas here, this release, rewire, be ready. And I feel like this is a good time to introduce these concepts because what you're talking about, I think, is identifying and releasing some of this negativity. And I know you talk a lot about breakthroughs happen with a change in belief, but first we have to release these old negative or self-limiting beliefs. Talk to us about what you mean when you say release.
Right. So release not only a lot of people talk, cognitive behavioral therapy, right? I've got to identify the programs and then I've got to release them. But it goes deeper than the programs. It's whatever those core emotions are that those thoughts make us feel. We've got to release those, right? So it's getting in touch with, the multiple layers, right? So you could have anxiety. Well, what's your anxiety about? Well, it's about a fear. Well, what's that fear tied down to? Well, it's I'm not seen, I'm not heard, I'm not loved. See, these are the deeper things that we've got to get into, those emotions that are associated with those, what we call cognitive distortions or negative schema. So it goes deeper than just thinking about what we think about. Then we've got to identify, well, what are those feelings? What are those emotions? See, it's the emotions that are going to drive our actions. And then our actions become our behaviors, and our behaviors become our lifestyle, right? So releasing those emotions. And you know what that starts with, Kevin? Realizing it's not our fault.
Yeah, that's a big one, isn't it?
It's so big, man. We
Yeah.
carry around these emotions for so long thinking it was our fault or holding resentment and blame and judgment against other people. They were, in 9 out of 10 times, they were just doing the best they can with what they knew. Just like you were doing the
Yeah, I
best
think a lot
you
of
can with what you knew.
yeah. Right, right. Yeah, so when we talk about release, so that's interesting, and I suspect that this is a lot easier said than done, right? When we're talking about very deep-rooted, complex emotional issues and traumas, these emotions that you're talking about, these feelings that we may not even be aware are in us sometimes. So bringing that awareness to that. But what are some tips for once we identify these things, we find this, I think you said, let's find this fear and let's figure out where's that coming from? What's coming from this emotion? And that's probably tied to something that's probably not our fault and that we can't control anyway or couldn't control at the time. So what are some tips for how do we release this fear? How do we release these emotions?
Realizing that it is not our inadequacies or that there's something wrong with us, which is the reason why these thoughts or these programs have been imprinted into us. I think a lot of times we look at life about what do I need to do? What do I need to change? What do I need to add on to my plate to be different? Ryan, give me a to-do list. There's a tremendous power in not doing and just releasing and saying, oh, these thoughts don't serve me and I don't need to carry them around anymore. Right. So that resentment that we may have towards our parents for not seeing us or loving us. Well, when we realize, hey, they were just doing the best they could with what they had, or maybe they weren't doing a good job. But you know what? We have two choices. We can either carry that resentment and guilt and negativity around with us, or we can choose to release it, right? Like I could have chose, and I did for a long time. My mother wasn't in my life, and even though I had a loving family, I was never really seen or loved the way I deserved. I could carry that around with me forever, right? Or I could say, you know what, that little boy was doing the very best he could, and everybody around him was doing the very best he could. And I don't need to feel sorry for myself or be seeking some kind of external motherly love. I have that love inside of me. And so I don't know if that answers your question. I'm not trying to beat around the bush, but sometimes the doing of the releasing is just realizing that we don't need to carry it around and being okay to give ourselves permission to release that.
Permission to release that. Yeah, I like that. I think that for a lot of us, it's going to be a lot of that work is going to be discovering that I've in fact have been harboring this resentment. I've been harboring this insecurity, whatever that is, right? Because look, let's face it, by the time you've lived 50, 60, 70 years, you've carried it around your entire life. It's your baseline. It's just how you it's part of your operating system by this point,
Yeah.
right? And so discovering that, and then the real power is in realizing, I suppose, that we have within us the capability of just letting go of that, right? I mean, that's our decision. Maybe again, maybe a little easier said than done. But if I can release that fear or that anger or that resentment or whatever that is tied to whatever it was, that's got to be incredibly freeing. Kind of like you're talking about, I had this transformation, and I suppose it starts with that release. Is that fair?
Yeah. How can you release something you don't even realize you're carrying?
Yeah. Yeah. So, so going back to more to that how then, I'm just kind of thinking in through my own life. Everybody carries around some garbage with them, right? And I'm trying
Sure.
to think, and how do I discover that? Are there things that I can do on my own, some self work that I can do to kind of uncover these things, or really is the best course of action for somebody to go and see a licensed professional and start doing some of this deep work? Where's that line between self care and professional care?
That's a great question. I don't do the work to help people. They do the work. I'm the facilitator of the
You're
change, right? But
right. You're the guide.
I
Okay.
can't help you. I can't help you to change if you don't want to change, right? So I always like to empower people. No, 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 you're doing the work. I'm not doing the work. You are, right? I'm a trusted companion in the journey. What would that look like for your own work? Quieting the mind, right? Meditation, yoga. You know, you were in the gym working out this morning. I'm sure you love working out, not only because it keeps you in great shape, right? But because it's that de-stressor for your mind where you get to unplug. That can look different for a lot of different people. It doesn't matter what it is, but quieting the mind. That's number one. Number two, once the mind gets quiet, we can start to more easily identify, hey, what is that thought that's creeping in? What is that old program that's creeping in, right? And then the last thing I would say is, a lot of people's reactions towards us in life have nothing to do with us. It has to do with their own projections. Now, on the flip side of that, we also have to realize that a lot of our life is what we're projecting onto other people.
Oh
So
yeah.
that's where it's the
Yeah.
humility and the vulnerability to say, hey, you know what? I, I'm not very proud of the way that I interacted with you the other day. And let me take some time to look at myself and say, why did I treat that person in that way?
Yeah, as you're speaking, I can think of, things that trigger me very often now. I've got the maturity and I'm just now starting this more mature me of taking a step back and saying, okay, why did that trigger me? This my wife says something and I feel like that's really mean and attacking. But when I step back from that and say, okay, well, why did what she said all of a sudden jack my heart rate, send my cortisol flying up, and just get me in this state? And when I back away and give it a minute to kind of cool off a little bit and look at that a little more dispassionately, I often find that I have a much different perspective than that initial reaction. And I think that's kind of comes from some of that inner work, some of the I do I do personally I have a meditation and prayer practice, and I think that that goes a long ways towards some of this that you're talking about, this humility and this vulnerability, which certainly have not been probably a lot of our strong suits, to be quite honest, right? Again, going back to more so maybe for men, right? It's tough to be vulnerable and to be humble sometimes, especially when it comes to things like feelings, fears, anxiousness, anxiety, things of that nature, right? So
Yeah,
very well said. Let's move on, because now we have I think a good idea of what you mean when you say release. The next concept you have here is this rewiring, right? What do
right.
you mean by rewire? What are we rewiring?
Rewire. So if you wanted to make a change in your life, let's use clothes. You wanted to get new clothes, right? So if you took all of the clothes out of your closet, it wouldn't take you long to get that closet refilled up with some clothes. If I took away your car, it wouldn't take you long to get a new car or find another way to get around, right? The rewiring is where we have an opportunity to put back into our empty closet the clothes that we want to wear with us on the next version of our life or the next step of our life, right? And so when we rewire, we give ourselves an opportunity. See, the brain is neuroplastic, meaning it can always be rewired. And a lot of people don't understand that, well, that's the way I've always been. No, no, no. That's the way the program has always been. But you can rewire that program. You can change it, right? So it's just like, okay, so what do I want to take with me on the next step of my journey? What thoughts, feelings, and emotions do I want to be my home? What emotional, regular? What do I want my emotional regular state to be? Peace, equanimity, joy, love, or staying into that fear and anxious, and I'm always in this fight or flight, right? So the rewire is the beautiful part about we get to put into our mind now whatever programs we want that are going to serve us for the life we want to live.
So you're saying we get to choose, just like I can choose what new clothes I want to wear. I'm going to change my car. I'm going to change my clothes. We get to choose this new future, this new us, these new beliefs. Now, is I can go out and change my wardrobe pretty quickly, right? Um,
Yeah.
how long would it take realistically for somebody who's carrying a decent amount of baggage around for their entire life? Is this again, we talked about this isn't really a destination, it's a journey, but
Yeah.
am I looking at a month's worth of work? Am I looking at a year's worth of work? Am I looking at decades? When will I start to see this new rewiring start to manifest in my life? I suppose what I'm trying to say.
There we go. I always say this: healing is not linear, right?
Mm,
So that healing process, right? It can happen in an instant, and it can happen over time. I'll speak to my own experience, but everybody is different. Within a couple of sessions with my counselor, with some of the work that we did together, I felt an incredible level of just like the weight of the world being lifted off my shoulders. With that having been said, I've also felt like I've continued to make progress over these past 3 years, and I hope to always continue to make progress. So I think that it comes in steps, it comes in stages. The releasing is so incredibly powerful that I think can happen more transformative. The rewiring, I would say that takes a little bit more time, just as with learning anything, right? It can take us time, and it would vary from person to person. I've had a lot of people, humbled and grateful to say that I've had a lot of people give me the opportunity to help them, and the amount of change that can happen in 90 days or 180 days is mind blowing.
yeah, and that resonates, and that certainly makes sense. I didn't expect for you to say, "Yeah, yeah, we can do this in a month." I got a 4-week program. Sign up. It's probably not that simple, right? Something we've carried around, and it's very similar in personal training and nutrition coaching as well. People that come into my practice, for example, and have had a certain way of eating or a certain sedentary lifestyle for years, decades, maybe. We're not expecting them to change everything overnight, and for that to be their new, their to change and to do that for the rest of their life, right? We're going to take small steps, and we're going to wait until those small steps start to cement into habits and become just their default mode, right? And then we're going to take the next step and the next step. But it's been my experience that these things, to your point, it's not necessarily linear, that we get these little exponential jumps as we start to pile one good habit on another in that case. And I think what you're saying here is that as we start to do this rewiring, each time as we move forward, we're building on the success that we've had before. That is that fair?
Yeah. Imagine it like this, right? So if we keep digging a ditch, right, and digging a hole, the water is going to go in through that, it's going to naturally flow in through that hole, right? That those programs that have been running through our head that are non-serving programs, man, those ditches got dug deep. Now we're going to
Mm.
release them, and we're going to bring kind of a homeostasis or a level of like, level of levelness, right? But now we want to create the new ditch or those new neurological programs that our brain is going to naturally default to. And that's going to take some time, just like the way that it took time for them to get rewired in the first place with the non serving. I'll say this: I think rewiring with the serving program can happen a lot faster and can be much more, fruitful, of course, than all those years that it took us to build that negative programming. Does that
Yeah,
make
and that
sense?
Yes, it does, and that's great news, right? Because let's say it's taken me 58 years to get here in maybe a dysfunctional state, right? It's I wouldn't expect it. I would hope it wouldn't take me another 58 to release and rewire like you're talking. Now, when we're talking about this rewiring, I love that you illustrate that with these very deep grooves, right? That these patterns that are these non-serving patterns that are there, and we need to be filling those in at the same time creating new grooves, right? And you had mentioned that the concept of neuroplasticity, that it's not that's not your default mode, doesn't have to be your default mode, right? We can change this, we can rewire this. What we had mentioned some ideas of how we could go about releasing. What are some ways that we can go about? What does the practice of rewiring look like?
Goal cards are tremendously important. So I have a little goal card that I've got one that I leave in my car. I've got one that I'm constantly carrying around with me. And basically, it doesn't necessarily have to be a gold card, but it could be just writing down what your goals are, the physical practice of writing down those goals, right? So for me, it's, I'm helping people all across the world to live healthier and happier lives. I do this through my counseling books and programs. Through this service to others, health, wealth, and abundance flows through my life. I'm going to read that written down on a card, I don't know, 20 to 25 times a day and just constantly be putting it into my mind. I record on my phone that same affirmation, and then I put it on repeat, and I will listen to it before I go to bed. So I'm constantly trying to put this positive, whatever it is and that could be different for everybody, right? But I'm constantly putting that into my mind, whether it's writing, whether it's hearing. There is a real power to inputting that into our brain. Then the other thing is, now, what books am I reading? Who am I following on social media? What am I watching? Right? Like, and I like to watch Netflix and unplug a little bit, but a lot of times, like, I'm listening to Bob Proctor or Les Brown or Ed Milet. And that's the content that I want to be consuming and putting into my mind. And the last part I'll say is who am I spending my time with? Who are those people that I'm surrounding myself with? And that's no judgment against other people, but if they're not at the vibrational level that you want to be at, it's going to be very hard not to slip into those old patterns and programs. When I wanted to change my life, I couldn't be around the people I went out partying with all the time. There's nothing wrong with them. I was that person for a while, right? But I need to remove myself from that so I can rewire with habits and people that align with where I want to go.
I love all of that. In fact, I'm going to take your gold card idea. I've heard similar types of things like that. Just obviously, positive affirmations are nothing new, but the way you describe that, actually having it, I have it in. I'm guessing you have it in your office. You have it in your car. You've got it on your phone. You play it to yourself. I think that's fantastic. And then you mentioned just the environment. What are you immersing yourself in? If it's that positive and encouraging these new, like you said, these new patterns in your brain, and then surrounding yourself with positive people. And you said something in there I really want to pull out. It's not even so much pulling, obviously need to get rid of the negativity as much as is possible, that you're surrounding yourself with people. But as you're looking to surround yourself with new people, one thing that I've heard that's really stood out for me and has been game changing, frankly, is to surround your people not just with people who are where you are in your journey, but with people who are where you want to be, where you aspire to go. Find those people and start surrounding yourself with those people and watch yourself level up. If you only are around people who are at your level, you're not really, at least for me personally, I
Yeah.
just don't feel like the growth is as rapid as it is when I'm surrounding myself with people who are even many steps ahead of me. So I think that those are some fantastic tips for all of us to rewire, right? To
Yeah.
practice
Like just
that.
this conversation that we're having, Kevin, right? Like there's an energy here, there's a vibration here. We both are coming from a place of service. We want to help people. And we also care about ourselves, right? Meaning mind, body, soul, to be healthy. And I think that when you can get around other people with that energetic match, forget about maybe what the outside world labels as successful or not, but when that energetic match can be there, man, oh, that's when the magic stuff happens.
Absolutely. I'm with you 100% on that. Yeah, that is where the magic 100% happens. All right, so we're going to rewire. Now we need to be ready. What do we need to be ready for?
Right? We need to be ready for that life that we want and that we deserve. And this is the big part of it. Is it is probably one of the most challenging aspects then when we have the success, when we have the health, when we have the wealth, right? To continue to keep ourselves in a vibrational state which will continue to align with that life. And I'm sure you see it, Kevin, right? You help somebody lose a whole bunch of weight and they make a whole bunch of progress. But if they, mind, body, and soul, are not ready to maintain that lifestyle, what's going to happen?
Yeah, right back where they were.
They revert back, right? So, in order to be ready, it's mind, body, soul. I've got to be ready and feel that I truly deserve this life and that this is not just a fluke and that this is really what I want. So to be ready. And the other thing is that that there's a process to this. It's gonna change. It's gonna morph. It's gonna take on new different shapes, colors, and sizes. And to be ready for whatever that may be, because healing is not linear. The progress is the beauty in all of this. It's not the destination. It's who we become. It's not the goal that makes me feel good. It's the person that I have to become in order to reach the goal. And what I love about helping people, right, is like, it's okay, well, we're going to get to your goal. But the beauty is in working with them and seeing them, and right, from
Hmm.
session to session, just that little progress, whether it's micro or it's macro. That's the beauty in all of this.
That is the beauty, and I think people might you started this out by saying when I said, "What do we need to be ready for?" And you said, "You need to be ready for success. You need to be ready to accept that you deserve that success." And people may be thinking right now, "Well, hang on. I mean, I'll take all the success I can get. I'm ready right now." But are you really, right? I think that when we step back from that and examine that, you do have to be prepared to step up in some cases and to accept and to continue to move forward with this humility and this vulnerability and realize that you didn't arrive, you're arriving. And I love how you talk about it's not so much accomplishing the goal, it's what happens on the way to the goal, and that the interpersonal development, or maybe that's physical development, whatever that particular goal is, it's who you're becoming as you're working towards that goal. So, speaking of goals, when you're working with people and working on them with their personal goals, obviously that's going to be different for everybody, right? But when we talk about goals, how big and how audacious of goals should we be setting for ourselves? Should I set a small goal that I know I can achieve so that I have that feeling of achievement, or should I shoot for the stars and go for it?
I think there's two parts to that, right? It is when we talk about setting goals, I want to be illogical when I'm setting my goals. Let me explain what I mean by that. Logic is based on past experiences. So, do I want to set my goals based on what I felt like was possible for me in the past with the non serving programming? Probably not, right? So, there's an extent to which I need to be illogical when I'm setting my goals because I've got to do it not from a framework of where I am, but from a framework of where I want my mind to be. So there's got to be a certain level of this to be unrealistic and illogical for the long term kind of vision of where I'm going. With that having been said, the biggest mistake that I see people make, and I'm sure Kevin, in your line of work, you see this, and that is we forget to celebrate all of the little victories. And you were saying it earlier, right? About stacking momentum,
Yeah.
creating goals that we can hit where we can build momentum. It allows us to be proud of ourselves. It allows us to feel like, okay, man, this process is worth it, right? Not just like, okay, well, I lost 5 pounds, so I get to have a cheat meal. Not just about that, right? There's a biochemical actions that are going on in your mind and body, right? Where you're getting that dopamine hit. And if you're constantly cheating yourself of that dopamine hit because it's like, nope, I can't celebrate until I get to the goal, right? You could get to the goal and then you'd be like, well, that wasn't worth it. 15 minutes,
Yeah.
2 days, whatever the case may be, right? It's called dopamine reward prediction error. And if I work real hard and then my brain only gets that little hit of dopamine, it's not going to want to work so hard next time. And so that's why celebrating those little victories along the way are so important.
Yeah, well, I love the way you answer that. We want to be illogical when setting goals. And I had one of my business mentors said, well, if your goals don't scare you, if you're not scared shitless of your goals, you probably need to go back and redefine what your goals are. So I love that. But then along with that comes this dose of reality that you're talking about. Okay, so here's your goal. You're at state A, you want to be at state B, right? Now we need a roadmap to get there. And along the way, we're going to chunk this big goal into a bunch of little goals because you're not going to do one her, Herculean effort and have it done, right? You're going to go through all of these steps. And that could be an interpersonal goal, that could be a financial goal, it could be a physical transformation type goal, all of those, right? But to have that almost audacious goal is a good thing. Is that fair?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's about noticing and celebrating the little changes that happen within inside of yourself
Yeah.
along the journey. Man, that is so critical. And I think that for individuals in their 40s, 50s, 60s, right? Even for myself in my 30s, I think maybe that's kind of where it ended, where it was just like this. Nope, it's not enough. You got to do more. Nope. I remember playing hockey in Canada. We lost. We made it to the finals of the tournament, and we had the team we were playing. We beat in the initial rounds 6-1. I mean, we smoked them. We play them in the championship game, and we lose 3-2. Coach comes in with the trophy. Awesome coach. Learned so much about life from this coach. Comes in with the trophy, right? Second place trophy. And he was French Canadian. And he goes, this is what you've won. And he throws the trophy in the garbage.
Wow.
Okay, second
Yeah.
place, throws the trophy. We should have beaten that team, man. I understand his frustration. We should have beat that team, right? But he throws the trophy in the garbage. And I'll never forget that experience. We all buried our second place trophies in our hockey bags when we came out of the locker room because we were all feeling so much shame, guilt, and embarrassment that we took second place. I think that was the old kind of maybe a little bit too extreme of that it's first place or bust, right? And in some ways that can serve us, in some ways that can help us, right? But there's also another underlying message there, which is we are enough, right? We are beautiful, perfectly imperfect human beings. I'm not going to be perfect. I'm never going to be perfect. And to set an expectation for yourself or others to be perfect, we're just setting ourselves up for failure. And that doesn't mean to not strive to be the best version of ourselves. It means to give ourselves some grace in that journey and process.
Grace in that journey and process. I love that. We're getting right up my alley here now. Um, I think that so many times we start a journey from a place of self-loathing, self-hate, self-disgust. For example, somebody who's on a fat loss journey, right? Okay, what has happened here? How these extra 40, 50, 60, whatever pounds got on my body? I'm going to do something because I'm disgusted, because I can't stand it. What's wrong with me? As opposed to you're talking about starting from this place, I am enough. I'm enough right now, right here. And because I love myself, okay, then from there I can step back and say, okay, I'm enough. I love myself. But in loving myself, I want to be honest with myself and say, I could be healthier. I could be taking better care of my body in this example, right? And what are some steps that I could take in order to show myself this love, right? As opposed to, oh God, I hate this. This is horrible. Why am I like this? Because what will happen is, I mean, self-hate, self-motivation is a pretty powerful motivator, but it doesn't last very long, right? Sooner or later, you do something you don't like. something you can't stand, and you just say, you know what, forget it. I'd rather not suffer through this. But if you
Yeah.
take this journey from a place of self-love, then the things that you are doing are more likely to build on themselves. You had kind of alluded to that a little bit. And I think that is a very powerful statement, just telling somebody you are enough right now, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's start. That's our starting place is you are enough. Yeah.
Right. And do I really love myself? Like, do I
Mm,
really love myself? Right? Because if I really love myself, I wouldn't have, went out on 4 day bingers, partying. Not if I really love myself, I wouldn't have done that. Right? If I really love myself, would I be going out and burying my anxiety and eating that food? If I really love myself, I probably wouldn't be doing that. Now, that's not to say I need to judge myself that I was
right.
using those things to numb my pain. But there's a fine line there, and I think that's the power of vulnerability when we can really connect. Right, real people connect, helping other real people, and when we can, be vulnerable and say, "Yeah, but do I really love myself? If I'm treating my body that way, do I really love myself? If I'm talking negatively to myself, does that mean I really love myself?" And so that's what I mean when I talk about just like that release of giving ourselves that grace and compassion. Okay. I am enough. And because I love myself, it's time for me to think about, do I want to start doing some things different and treating my body different, right? If it's somebody that you're working with.
Yeah, very well said. So I feel like we're now kind of skirting the area. I know you're really big in this, the mind, body, spirit connection. And I feel like we're skirting into the area of spirituality here. I guess before we go any further, because I do want to ask you a couple questions about spirituality, how this plays into our mental health. But how has spirituality played out in your life? Does it have a place? Is it important to you? Was it always?
That's a great question, and I just got the goosebumps right now as you asked that question. So I know that there's a presence with us in this moment. So I was raised in a Roman Catholic family. Grew up, the altar server, the Eucharistic minister, the lector. I mean, I played Jesus Christ in the Passion of the Cross. You know, um, in school, right? I went to Catholic schools all growing up. So I would say that, capital R religion played a major role in my life for a long period of time. After that, I would say because of my own actions, my relationship with what I call I call God my higher power, right? Allah, Brahma, uh, the great infinite universe, right? The great universal mind. It's been known by a lot of different names. The Tao, right? Um, I was not allowing myself to stay connected to God or my higher power. The most transformative healing happened in my life when I was able to reconnect with that power and realize that it was not external from me, that it was a part of me, just like it's a part of you, Kevin. I feel it's a part of you. It's a part of me. It's a part of each and every one of us, and it connects all of us in this beautiful way. So yes, that was a transformative moment for me to realize that healing power, it exists inside of me just as much as it exists in this beautiful world we live in.
Okay, and that's interesting because you're equating a higher power with a healing power, and you're not just talking about healing of yourself, but really now we're talking about this sort of global healing because you just mentioned it. Okay, now when I'm connected to my higher power, I'm connected to others in a different way, and I'm harnessing a power that's both within me and without me, I suppose. I mean,
Mhm.
obviously, when we start talking about spirituality, things get a little bit it can feel a little woo woo in today's parlance, I suppose. But yeah, I think that that's very interesting. Now, when people come and work with you, are you talking to them about spirituality? Is that a part of your practice? If we are going to say, hey, in order to be whole, I want you to be physically healthy. I want you to be mentally healthy. I want you to be emotionally healthy. I want you to be spiritually healthy. Are you integrating all of this when you're working with your folks?
That's a great question. I believe that we all have free will. I believe that our higher power gave us all free will to make our own decisions. So it is my job as a humble servant to the individual that I have the opportunity to help, for me to operate within a framework that resonates and makes sense with them. So if they would like to invite spirituality into our conversation, which it often does, believe it or not, and that may
Oh, I
take
believe it. Yeah.
many
Yeah.
different shapes or forms,
Right.
but it often comes in. If it does, great. I think that adds a whole other layer to which we can um, bring transformative healing into the clinical relationship. If not, that's okay. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that we've made in this world today is like, it's got to be my way, and only my way is right. No,
Right. Yeah.
no, right? I'm here to serve you, however that
You
may
would be
look.
pretty
And if that
smart
means
if you had
bringing,
all of the cosmos figured out, right?
yes, yeah,
If you had all of the answers, you'd be I want to talk to you, right?
yeah,
But no, I'm wholeheartedly with you. And when if I speak, of God or higher power, and I can tell people, that's automatically put some distance between us, where I can see him visibly when says, okay, wait, just use the word divine reality, right? I mean, just use another word. But when we talk about these subjects, so I like what you're talking about. So you're not necessarily bringing this up as a part of your transformation when you're working with people, but you probably have in the back of your mind that it's a component of this human being that you're dealing with, but you're welcoming that conversation should it come up, and you're going to meet that person where they are. It sounds like.
yeah, beautifully said.
Yeah.
Meet them wherever they are in that moment, right? I think
Yeah.
I've had times in my own life, right, or even after the spiritual, awakening, where I've never felt more connected to my higher power, more connected to God, right? I think it's part of the human nature and human experience to be like, wow, I'm struggling with my faith today, and maybe I can't speak about my faith the same way today that I can tomorrow. Meaning just in that moment, and so it's about meeting people where they are in general, but even meeting people where they are in that moment.
100%. That's very, very well said. Well, Ryan, as we're wrapping up here, uh, what is next for you? What's on the horizon? What do you got coming up here in the next 1 to 2 years, let's say?
Well, I've officially started my own private practice out here in Washington State, telehealth counseling. I'm soon going to be licensed in Oregon and British Columbia as well. So really is to have my telehealth practice where we can, to your point, right, really find that meeting ground for individuals that are looking to integrate mind, body, soul wellness. And that's a main focus for me. I think the other focus is going to be continuing to do my own podcast, which you'll be a guest on soon, and writing some more books, and just really being of service to other people, and helping people, and doing what I believe God's mission is here for me, which is to be vulnerable and to spread His love and light.
Right on. Yeah, I'm going to practice both of those things as soon as we're. Soon, in fact, I'm going to start right now. Right, I'm going to practice because vulnerability is not a strong suit of mine. I'm getting better at it. Humility is not either. Just admitting when I'm clearly wrong. It's not been a strong suit of mine, and I'm on my spiritual path, right? So I absolutely love all of that. Ryan, how can people connect with you and potentially work with you? You mentioned that you're licensed in a couple of geographic locations, but let's say I've got listeners all over the world, right? Can people still, obviously people can connect with you on social media or wherever you want to send them, but what do you have in the way of people that like what they hear and would like to reach out and maybe have a professional relationship with you as well?
Sure. So for anybody that's looking for kind of more spiritual and life coaching, I can help you anywhere in North America. You could send me an email, Ryan Kopyar Holistic Healing. And for anybody that's looking for clinical mental health counseling services in Washington State, soon to be Oregon and British Columbia, you can also send me an email and just let me know, hey, this is more clinical, help that I'm looking for, or more kind of life coaching and spirituality.
Okay. And you are at ryankopyarholistichealing.com, right? I think folks can
Yes.
find your
Yep.
website there.
Yep. And
And
my
you're active on social
Instagram,
media?
yeah, Instagram is Ryan Kopyar, Kopyar. Try to just keep it simple.
Yeah. Okay, great. And folks, I will drop all of that into the show notes so you can find that information there. So, Ryan, I just want to thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing all of your wisdom and your knowledge and your passion and your love with us. I wish you all the best in all of your future endeavors.
Thank you so much, Kevin. It's a humble honor to be with you. And in a couple weeks, the tables will be turned, and
Yeah,
so
that's
I'm
right.
very excited to share your message and your story. So excited for that conversation as well, Kevin.
Right on.